just to introduce Gareth again, as members would know, he's been our president for some time and the author of many articles in the Society Journal. He's also in particular researched and published a complete database of all Australians who died while serving in the Royal Flying Corps and later the RAF. It's been published in a series of society journals. You could tell us which ones they are, Gareth, because I can't remember offhand. And it contains short histories of each of their services, their photograph and other notable features of their lives, and also the action, details of the action in which they lost their lives. And it's a wonderful record, and we're trying to get greater recognition of that via various means, including through our patron and access, and people getting ready access to that. Okay, and of course Gareth has enormous raft of knowledge on all things aviation in World War I, including, interestingly enough, the Russian air conflict post-1918. And perhaps he might be able to expand on that and the role of the RA8 in that as well. Okay, I'll hand you over to our esteemed speaker, President Gareth.
Thank you very much, Des, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. This started off as an article for the journal and will appear in the journal sometime in the future. But we were looking for something to use as this presentation, and this is what we ended up with. So if we go to the next slide, please. Right, in 1916, it was apparent the Royal Flying Corps aircraft, the BE-2C and BE-2E, were obsolete. Now, just to explain to anyone who's not familiar, a Royal Flying Corps brigade was attached to each army in the British Expeditionary Force. And a brigade had 3 wings: an army wing, which was fighters and long-range bombers; a corps wing, which did the artillery observation, reconnaissance and contact patrols, and general army cooperation; and a kite balloon wing. Each corps in the army was assigned a corps squadron, hence the term corps. So, right, next one, thanks. The BE-2s, though, there was a real problem with them. They were obsolete since probably the middle of 1915. They were underpowered, they were too stable, they were not very manoeuvrable, they were flown from the rear cockpit, and they had no forward-firing armament. Just to explain, they were a development of the pre-war design, the BE-2 and the BE-2A. The observer was in the front cockpit because it was thought that he would have a better view from there. He could see the ground better from in front of the leading edge of the wing. And it was a stable aircraft, so that he was able to make notes of things on the ground without being disturbed by the aircraft being thrown around. It's the deficiency of the type were well recognised, and it had to be replaced. And the RE-8 was the aeroplane that was going to replace it. But it took an inordinate time for the RE-8 to get into service. This will surprise anyone who's dealt with government projects, but it took a lot longer than was anticipated. Unfortunately for the people flying BE-2s in France, this meant they had to persist with an inferior aeroplane far too long. But so we get the RE-8, and it's certainly an improvement over the BE-2 design. As you'll see, it's flown from the front cockpit. There was a forward-firing gun. But this is the original design with a very small fin, both upper and lower fin. And we'll get on later and see how they improved this. The other thing is, you'll notice the observer's Lewis gun isn't on a scarf ring as it was on later aircraft. It's just on a single pintle mount, which made it a bit harder to move around. Right, next one, thanks. Right, but there we have some of the improvements over the BE-2 series. The pilot in the front cockpit, a much more powerful engine, but still a fairly underpowered aircraft. That synchronized Vickers gun certainly made life a lot easier. It could defend itself. And the observer had a good field of fire from the rear cockpit. Right, thanks. Right, number 52 Squadron was going to be the first RE8 unit, formed at Hounslow, May 1916, from a nucleus from number 39 Home Defence Squadron. Original aircraft were the BE-2C and the BE-12. The RE8s were delivered in September 1916, straight from the Royal Aircraft Factory. This was the only batch of RE8s that were actually built by the Royal Aircraft Factory. And the commander was a pre-war pilot, Major Leonard Parker, who'd flown with 5 Squadron in 1915. Go on. Next slide. Leonard Parker has another claim to fame. You can see him there in the rugby team from Oxford University in 1905. He played for the university against the New Zealand All Blacks, losing 47-0. He did score a try in their loss to Cambridge later in the year. He only stayed at university for a year and then went into farm management, and he qualified as a pilot in 1913 and joined the Royal Flying Corps when war was declared. Right, next one, thanks. Right, unfortunately, number 52 Squadron had a steady series of losses with its aircraft. I've listed them in chronological order. So you can see 26 October, A68, minor accident. 7th of November, A76 crashed during takeoff. Had a lot of crashes during takeoff and landing. The aircraft stalled and probably that small tail didn't help. On the 17th of November, the squadron deployed to France, or most of it. A80 was forced to land en route, fortunately with no injuries. 22nd of November, A75 landed near the English Channel while they were familiarising themselves with France. Unfortunately, again, no injuries. Next, thanks. There's 2 of the pilots involved. Canadian James Lockhart and Douglas Carberry. But, right, go. Next one, thanks. Right, there's 1st of January, New Year's Day, their first fatal casualties. A82 nosedive spun into the ground before bursting into flames after an artillery spotting mission. And after that, the aircraft burst into flames and pilots were naturally nervous about this. So many filled up the fuel tank that was immediately behind the engine with fire extinguisher fluid, because they found with a forced landing or a crash, the fuel tank would burst or would break, and fuel would flow over the hot engine and burst into flames. So this was common on RE8s right through the war, to fill that tank with fire extinguisher fluid. Unfortunately, on the 7th of January, Leonard Parker was killed when he was shot down by Lieutenant George Schlenker from Newcastle 3. His observer fortunately survived as a prisoner of war. Right, thanks. The problems continued. On 22nd of January, A101 stalled and nosedived while being delivered, killing the pilot. Next day, A103 was damaged while landing. Next day, A100 was forced to land by a badly running engine while on a delivery flight. 27th of January, A86 was damaged while being prepared for a photographic flight. Right. 28th of January, A89 wrecked in a forced landing on an artillery patrol. 12th of February, the A70 was returned to Farnborough for tests to determine if there are any inherent flaws in the design. And as you'd expect, the people who designed the aeroplane thought it was fine. They couldn't find any defects. However, eventually it was realised that there was a problem with stability. So the size of the upper and lower fins were increased, and training aircraft often had much enlarged fins. You keep going. Right, we'll see there's another shot of an early production machine, and you can see how small that tail is. The vertical and the under fin. In fact, there's almost nothing of an under fin. Right, next one. Right, there's a later production aircraft, in this case D4889 of 42 Squadron, and you can see there that the upper fin has been extended in front of the beginning of the tail, and also the fin underneath has been enlarged as well. Something that's interesting out of the photo is the aircraft has obviously been redoped at some point, and the letter prefix of the serial number hasn't been included when they've repainted it. So it just says 4889. I think this is done just to confuse historians 100 years later. All right, continue, thanks. Right, there's an aircraft at a training unit, 38 training depot station. And you can see the size of the fin there. It's been massively increased, and the rudder. So this to introduce pilots to the RE8. When they got used to that, they then went back to a normal size tail on operational aircraft. Right, continue. Right, Royal Flying Corps Headquarters was concerned about the RE8. This was the aeroplane that was going to solve all the problems that they had with the BE2, and it was rapidly gaining a reputation of being a worse aircraft than the one it was to replace. They also had to do something, and the surprising idea was that number 52 Squadron and number 34 Squadron exchanged aircraft. Number 34 Squadron had BE2Es, and they gradually changed all their aircraft over. So all 52 Squadron's RE8s were transferred to 34, and 52 began to fly BE2Es. They started in January 1917, and it continued for a couple of months. Right, keep going. Unfortunately, the problems with the early RE8s continued. As you'll see, 23rd of January, A83 was wrecked while on patrol. It survived that, but it was later wrecked in March. A75 crashed and burnt while being delivered on 31st of January. 11th of February, A81 crashed while landing. 15th of February, A72 side-slicked and crashed, killing the crew. And A87 was shot down by ground fire. Right. It continues. A92 was wrecked during a forced landing after an engine failure. 6th March, sorry. A77 spun into the ground during takeoff during a reconnaissance, killing the crew. 25th of March, A80 crashed and a propeller blade was damaged. In fact, it was, I think, pretty near shot off by a malfunctioning Vickers gun while the pilot was practicing firing at a ground target. A86 was wrecked by strong winds during takeoff on 24th of March. Yep. A79 crashed during takeoff on 12th of April. 24th of April, A88 crashed while on a neutralization fire patrol. A73 overturned by a wind gust during takeoff on 30th of April. A68 somehow lasted until the 31st of October, and it was finally declared time expired and returned to the UK. So one of those aircraft managed to last till October, but all the others eventually crashed, which shows, well, two things, I suppose: the problems of the early RE8s and just the attrition rate of aircraft in core squadrons. Next one, please. Eventually, May 1918, RFC headquarters decided that after their experience with BE2s, 52 Squadron were now able to fly RE8s, and they were re-equipped with the proper RE8, although the ones with the bigger tail. And the squadron went on to be awarded battle honours for the battles of Messines and Third Ypres. So yeah, they provided valuable service for the rest of the war. Okay. But there's a drawing of an RE8 in 52 Squadron. You can see the distinctive squadron markings of that zigzag on the rear fuselage, right? And there's another drawing of another RE8. They're both those drawings are of aircraft with a larger tail, right? Right. When the RE8 went on to be the primary core airplane for the RFC, RAF, and the Australian Flying Corps on the Western Front, used in Italy, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Some were used in Ireland after the and both North and South Russia after the armistice. The Belgians also operated one squadron of them, but they fitted their aircraft with Hispano Suizo engines, so they look like a cross between a SPAD and an RE8, right? And I just, while we're on the subject of RE8s, I just threw in this bit that RE8s were supplied to General Anton Denikin's anti-Bolshevik forces in South Russia, but it seems the trainee Russian pilots took one look at them and refused to fly them. But Denikin's army advanced to within 400 miles of Moscow, December 1919, and they had at least two RE8s from Z Flight 47 Squadron, which was actually renamed the RAF Advisory Mission by then. And someone came up with the idea of bombing Moscow. To do that, they'd have to establish a fuel depot halfway, which would be in the fairly fluid state of the Russian Civil War, that could have been done. And the aircraft would have to land there on the way to Moscow and on the way back to refuel. It would have been a very cold flight, I think, in an open cockpit RE-8 in Russia in December in December, long flight over the snow. The plan was submitted to the War Minister Winston Churchill, who refused to allow the RAF to take part. So Moscow wasn't bombed until the Luftwaffe did the job in 1941. But it's just an interesting sidelight of one of the things that the RE-8 nearly did. Right? Okay. And that's it. So I hope that was of some interest. You can see it just shows that the problems they had with early RE-8s. So Des,
we're back on screen now,
right.
And I've got a question from Paul Samadas. How did the loss rate of the RE-8 compare to other types in service? And also, what was a fire neutralization mission?
Right, neutralization fire. It meant directing fire onto enemy batteries. So to neutralize, I suppose that's a polite word for shooting at an enemy artillery battery. Loss rate, a bit hard to say because the BE-2s, which is the other core aircraft, were having pretty horrendous loss rates as well. So no, I haven't studied how the RE-8s compared, but they were all having a pretty hard time because we're running into the worst time of the war for the RFC, bloody April, when I think that the loss rate was horrendous. Right.
You can unmute your microphones, anybody who wants to ask a further question or ask Gareth to expand on anything.
Gareth, I noticed there were a lot of landing accidents, etc. How did it compare accidents in training and landing and sort of non-combat accidents compared to combat destruction?
I think most of the ones of that early RE-8 seem to be non-combat. Taking off and landing seem to be the hazardous phase of their operations. But they're probably lucky that they didn't get into combat with them. But the small tail probably was an effort to make them more manoeuvrable than the BE-2s. But it seems that the designers went a little bit too far.
This is Paul here. May I ask Gareth, can you explain the nomenclature associated with the RE-8? And also, did it have a nickname as an aircraft, and how did it originate?
Right. RE-8 stands for Reconnaissance Experimental Type 8. This goes back to the original of the pre-war Royal Aircraft Factory. They were allowed to experiment with aeroplanes, but they weren't technically allowed to design new ones. So what they could do, this is pre-1914, they could modify aeroplanes that they had. So the BE series were in fact Blériot experimentals. They looked nothing like a Blériot, but they were able to get away with designing aeroplanes by calling them Blériot experimentals. The FE series were Farman experimentals, but by the time that the RE-8s, they were reconnaissance experimental. It was rather like, I know this from my experience, of whole sheds being built from maintenance funds on airports. That yeah, there was no money to build new sheds, so they were maintained even though they didn't exist in the first place. Yeah, the RE-8 was generally known as the Harry Tate, after a popular music hall comedian of the time, whose acts involved very complex pieces of machinery that he had trouble operating. And for some reason, pilots saw the RE-8 and said, oh, it looks like something Harry Tate would use. And so the nickname Harry Tate stuck with the RE-8. Right.
I've got another question from Alex Stewart. What he wants you to expand on what time expired means, the one in October that had time expired.
a technical term for worn out. So yeah, it got beyond the point of being able to be tightened up and repaired on the Squadron. So it was sent back to Britain and reduced to produce probably. Yeah,
which brings me to a question. A4397, flown by Captain RGD Francis in number 3 Squadron AFC, that did some staggering, James Oglethorpe will know the number of hours, but some staggering number of hours, and it was apparently the longest hours of any of them on the Western Front. How come it didn't get time expired?
Well,
I mean, it was actually returned, but it seems to have flown and flown and flown.
Des, I can offer a few comments if you like on that Sylvia aircraft. It actually was very well maintained, like the proverbial shovel, where the handle and the blade and are all changed several times. I think it had many engine changes and many rigging changes, reskinned many times. I think almost every time they flew, they'd come back with bullet holes, and those were patched, with no real comment. And Des, I think you might have told me the story that the pilots used to compare each other's tallies of how many bullet holes they had in their canvas when they came back. But Sylvia actually, I think it was lucky in that it was also the personal aircraft of a very successful pilot, and that was important in its survival as well. Otherwise, it would have been just scrapped and turned over. And then it was preserved for the War Memorials collection. And you may know that it sadly was burnt in an accidental fire in Melbourne at the exhibition building. And that was when the War Memorial didn't have permanent headquarters and was sort of travelling between the capital cities. And both Sylvia, the RE-8, and also the Halberstadt, the 3 Squadron captured in mid-air, were burnt in the same accident. They were crated up for moving to Sydney, and there had been a cycling race in the exhibition building grounds, and they were cleaning up all the pamphlets and things from the cycling. And sadly, they caught fire and the crates went up.
Oh, that is an amazing history, and thank you, James. Anything to add to that, Gareth?
No, just a terrible shame that we lost the aircraft and both aircraft. It'd be lovely to see a genuine Halberstadt around.
Yes, dear, oh dear.
Yeah, Des, I've got a question, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Gareth, you mentioned in your presentation that Russian pilots refused to fly RE-8s. Did they say why?
I think they just didn't like the look of it. They were probably angling for better aircraft. The RAF supplied DH9s, DH9As and Camels to 47 Squadron, and RE-8s. So possibly they wanted to fly DH9As or Camels, but they just couldn't get them to at the training school. They just wouldn't get into things and fly them.
They got a bad rap, didn't they, Des, with the handling that they apparently that was reported that they had. So a lot of people wouldn't fly them. Which squadron was it that handed them back? Was it 52 that handed them back, or was it
52? Yeah, 52's RE-8s went to 34 Squadron.
Right. Yeah.
34
okay.
Squadron got the.
But there is the story of I think it was Captain Cox who had heard that the guys were not happy to fly the aeroplane because they were worried that it was going to spin, and they were saying that the fin was too small. And you mentioned the fin there, that they changed the size of it a few times. That seems to be a little bit more of a way to placate some of the pilots than any aerodynamic issues, because Captain Cox actually went to one of the squadrons, pulled his pocket knife out and cut out the fin of cut out the material from the fin, went up and apparently spun the aeroplane and did aerobatics in it above the crowd of watching pilots, landed it, and apparently said, "Oh, so the fin's too small, is it?" And apparently gave me a bit more confidence to fly the aeroplane.
Just a bit of background here for everybody, in case you didn't, in case you came in a bit later. Chris Tulk speaking now is one of the 2 pilots of the RAAF replica RE-8 that flies out of Point Cook, that's currently not flying out of Point Cook, as you explained before. But and you've got an extensive knowledge, and you gave an amazing talk to us which we recorded and should be on the website eventually, the members' website, on flying the RE8 and the history of its manufacture and the features of it. So thank you, Chris.
No worries.
I was just wondering, Chris, have you flown any other World War I types?
I've flown the Sopwith Pup replica, but it doesn't have the rotary engine in it. It's got a radial. It's got the, it's gone blank for a second. It's got a 7-cylinder radial in it as opposed to the rotary, which the original Pups had. So the one that the museum has was built by, I think it's called Transavia in about 1977. So I've flown that one as well.
I suppose they're chalk and cheese to fly.
Very much so. Yeah. The Sopwith Pup is, as you probably would be aware, is a remarkable aeroplane. It's just, for the early time of the war, when it was flying as a fighter, it was incredibly maneuverable, very light, very nimble. And then you get into the RE8, and it's a bit like the Queen Mary. It's a big, solid bus. In fact, I just realised now that I had a video, which I should have spoken to Des about, whether I could share it with you, about a 5-minute video that I was going to show at the last presentation when I went up there, but for IT reasons, we couldn't get it to work. But if I was able to show that at the end of the speech, if anyone wanted to hang around, if I could put it on, something I'm not sure if I can even, I'm not very good with this IT stuff. That's a 5-minute video on showing a bit of the stability of the airplane, startup procedures, landing and the like. If anyone was interested.
That sounds terrific. You can go to share screen to put that on.
Oh, okay.
And if it should come up.
I'll wait till the end if anyone wants to hang around.
Give it a go.
Look, if I can give it a go.
Yeah, certainly.
Can I just put another question, Gareth, from Adrian Roberts? Adrian said the reason the BE-2 had the observer in the front seat was to provide a better view. Was it not also so that the observer sat over the centre of gravity, so that if flown solo, the pilot could fly from the rear seat without having to add ballast in the tail or use a trimming device which had not been devised at the time? And the Tiger Moth is flown solo from the rear seat for the same reason. Gareth, or any? Yeah,
that I think that's one of the questions that often appears is why wasn't the BE-2C or 2E redesigned to put the pilot in the front seat so the observer could be in the rear and at least have some defensive ability? And it was the centre of gravity was the problem. The BE-2D, in fact, did move the pilot to the front seat, but to do that, they had to take a fuel tank out of the fuselage and put it underneath one of the upper wing.
Bit vulnerable.
I was given a much more cynical explanation of that by a Tiger Moth pilot who I once went up with. I asked him that precise question: why are the pilots in the back and non-pilots in the front? He said, simple. If this nose dives and crashes, the engine is going to be driven backwards. It's the passenger who will get killed, but the pilot who's in the rear will have a much better chance of survival. That was his explanation.
I think mainly it is to do with the weight and balance. And correct me if I'm wrong, the BE-2 at some stages in the early stages, because it was so underpowered, they had to, when they started to do bombing stuff, they actually had to get rid of the observer because they couldn't carry an observer and the bombs and the fuel. The airplane just wasn't powerful enough to get out of off the ground. So they would remove the observer and then they could carry the weight of the bombs, and that the pilot would then be in the right centre of gravity for that one. Yeah. Just an interesting thing about the Tiger Moth, if you have a look at a DH-60 versus a DH-82, you'll see that the Tiger Moth top wing is swept forward, so it's actually pushed forward above the cockpit in the front. And the reason they did that was so that, because the instructors used to sit in the front seat when they were flying that during war training, and they thought the instructor was more important than the student, of course. So when they were wearing their parachutes, if the wing had been above it as it was in the DH-60, it would have been very difficult or not possible for the instructor to get out with their parachute. So they just pushed the wings forward, literally just push it forward. They had to then sweep them left and right in order to get the centre of balance and everything correct. But the wing was just literally pushed forward so that you could egress with the parachute so that the instructor could get out if the student stuffs up.
Gosh.
You flew the RE8. Chris, I think you flew the RE8 replica with ballast in. as well. What was the reason for that?
Yeah, we've taken the initial flying was done with the pilot and the observer in the back. To be frank and honest about it, the reason was risk management. So the Air Force looked at the risk management profile and decided that one was better than two in terms of losses. So that when we fly in the airplane, we would fly it as often as we could, single pilot or single pilot, so that if there were any accidents, we wouldn't damage anybody else. So we put 75 kilos of ballast throughout the back of the airplane in small, made out of just small lead pellets, and they'll put in canvas bags and then put throughout the back of the airplane to put it in the right center of gravity.
Amazing, amazing. And I see that Paul has asked how many RE8s were Gareth served in the Australian Flying Corps, and I think they were just in number 3 Squadron, and I think, you know, how many RE8s were there overall with the RFC as well?
Just a moment, I'll have to drag out a book to get total production numbers.
Yeah, I think that's what Paul's question was.
I think it's 4,077 from memory, I think.
Right. That'd be, I was going to say it would be around the 4,000 mark. There also, one squadron flew some in Palestine, I think.
They did, and in fact today is the anniversary in 1917. The first 2 RE8s arrived at one squadron today.
Gosh. That's fascinating. James Oglethorpe, you were asked if you could expand on aggressive combat handling in the RE8. Would you like to do that? Are you there, James?
Whilst James is waiting, one squadron AFC flew 10 RE8s in its time in the Middle East.
Really?
Not for a very long period, but they were sort of in transition before they got the Bristol fighters. So.
Right, right. Of course, Mark has written the definitive book on One Squadron Australian Flying Corps, if I could say that, Mark.
Well, it's not my book. It's the...
sorry, in conjunction with your colleagues, and I've forgotten their name.
No, it's all right.
Mark's the perfect person to ask. The information that I had, Mark, is that correct? That today was the first? I've got that written down in my little history notes, that today was the day that they arrived. 2 of them, I think, was today.
I've got to refer to my little diary.
I
did. Hang on a sec, I'll let you know.
But the AFC operated 135 RE8s.
Right, right.
th of October, quite tricked. A3796.
Oh, good. So it was only the one arrived, not 2.
Yeah, I got these from the unit routine orders which are available in the War Memorial. They all have, as well as postings in and sicknesses and honours and awards, they do have listings of the changes of engines that went back to the depots and arrived from the depots, and also the aircraft arrivals and departures. So A3796 arrived in 1917 and lasted until January 18, so it really wasn't very long, a short period. Yeah.
Just to interrupt for a moment, Adrian Roberts has messaged to say that it's now 2 a.m. in London and he's going to bed. He says, good night, everybody, and thank you, Gareth, for your presentation.
Oh, that's good.
Well, that's a night fighter by any means to be up at 2 a.m.
Have we got James Oglethorpe back by any chance?
Yes, Des, I'm back. Sorry, I suffered a sudden freeze, and I thought that was your problem, and then it turned out to be my problem.
Okay. Would you like to expand on what you were going to talk about there?
Yeah, I noticed in one of Gareth's blurbs about the talk that he was saying how if properly handled, the RE8 could make a good account of itself in combat, and most people in this group would know that the 3 Squadron RE8s had a very good account of themselves in terms of the number of planes they actually shot down versus the number that were themselves shot down. although we also know that quite a lot came down with many holes in them, but were recovered. And however, the story about the aggressive handling of the RE-8 is probably best verified by a German claim that was made on Cliff Peel's aircraft that was shot down in the last few weeks of the war. And Cliff Peel is a fairly famous RE-8 pilot who made the original suggestion about the foundation of the Flying Doctor Service. And we've got quite a popular article on our website, the 3 Squadron website, about Cliff Peel. But the Germans misidentified the RE-8 as a Bristol fighter. So he was tackled by 3 Germans, I think flying Fokker D7s. And if they thought it was a Bristol fighter they were fighting, that's the best possible endorsement of the RE-8's combat ability, I think.
Gosh, that's fabulous. Could I also, while we're here, give a plug to the 3 Squadron Association and your website, James? They have some, it has some remarkable stuff on there to do with articles to do with aircraft and World War I aircraft, the RE-8 that was used, and particular members of Number 3 Squadron, and consider joining the 3 Squadron Association. James, so if you could tell us or put in the chat the website, you know, and how.
Oh, yes, okay, I'll add it to the chat. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Paul here. I would like to ask Mark Lax how the pilots in Number 1 Squadron AFC reacted to flying the RE-8, and was its employment varied in that theatre because of the lack of aircraft or the particular requirements of the expeditionary force there?
Yeah, interesting question, Paul. The way I saw it is that most of the modern types went to the Western Front, which was where, as far as the British were concerned, the most concentrated effort was. And the further east you went, the less more modern types you got. So really the RE-8s that went into the desert in late 1917, they'd already been superseded from the Western Front. And these weren't new aeroplanes, they were ones that had been recycled. They were all delivered through the aircraft depot in Cairo. And as far as I can tell, they all went, if they didn't, I don't think any got shot down, but if once they'd finished with them, they went back to the depot. Some went to 14 Squadron. And at that stage, as the war was turning quite rapidly in the Middle East, 1 Squadron became an army squadron and they received their Bristol fighters. And the RE-8s were put back to the core squadron work, which, as Gareth said, was their main job. From what I gathered, the RE-8s didn't do too badly in the Middle East. They were, in the hot weather, surprisingly good. And because they were a reasonably stable platform, they were good for photography. And so consequently, that's why they went to the core squadrons, and they were used to some relative success. But by the same token, the enemy air opposition wasn't as great as it was over the Western Front. And so, yeah, I really don't know whether they were considered successful by the crews or not. But certainly 10 of them went there and didn't last for too long, so a couple of months only.
I gave a talk on, after Chris gave his talk back at our society meeting last year, on the pilots who flew the RE-8 in Number 3 Squadron AFC, and I'll put together a summary of that for the journal, because it's what I basically did was just put together what their comments were about it, and going further on James's discussion about them in combat. There's some reference by them to if they were flying together, they would fly side by side and be able to direct the observers' fire very accurately, and also do if they were flying singly, they would go into a turn, a right-hand turn, I think, I think this was Jack Tracy's recollection of it, a right-hand turn, and they wouldn't come inside the attacking plane, but they would give the observer a very good field of fire, and so they certainly managed to work out an effective way of using it in combat. Just thought I'd add that.
I would like to ask Gareth whether the RE-8 flew with the American squadrons and if any were manufactured in that great country for service in the Great War.
No, the American observation squadrons either used the American-built DH-4 or French types, Samsons or Brejoux. So no, the Americans didn't fly the RE-8.
Oh, I just should add that I think Adrian Helwig has left. If he's still there, thank you, Adrian, for joining us. And thank you for all your work on Stan Dallas.
I'm still here, Des.
Oh, okay, you're still here. Okay.
I was thanking the other Adrian for joining.
Oh, okay.
And leaving.
Okay. Okay, never mind.
I'm sorry to ask so many questions, but I want to test Gareth's knowledge. Can he name the highest scoring ace flying a FE-8?
RE-8s.
The RE-8 in combat?
Not offhand. No, I could look it up, but no, I'll look it up and let you know.
I think there is some chap in the RFC who managed quite a few. Yeah. And I'm afraid I don't know either.
Can I just go back to the Australians in Palestine? There was actually a couple of crashes. Just looking up the Bull Diary here, one crashed on takeoff. The crew got out of it, and that was a couple of days after they received it. But unfortunately, Lieutenant Potts was killed in a mid-air collision with a British RE-8. And that was on 4th of December, 1918. So really, very unlucky to die that way. The observer was Lieutenant Parkinson. He actually survived the accident and was taken prisoner of war because it was over the German lines. So no one shot down, but one tragic loss because of a mid-air. And there you go.
Yeah. I should just add that James Oglethorpe has put up the website on the chat screen, www.3squadron.org.au, and if you go to the chat icon at the bottom, you can bring that up.
You know, Des and folks, you were talking about the crashes early on, and I don't remember the source. I just remember reading a bit, and I saw the inscription on that photo we had for the training squadron. There was a little inscription by the observer's cockpit. I remember there's something about the observer was not to stand up on takeoff or landing because it would have propensity to stall the RE-8. Does anyone remember hearing about that bit? I don't remember the source.
Yeah, there was a stickling on the side of a lot of them. I know there was also an instruction about when returning from trips over the lines that the observer wasn't to look over the pilot's shoulder because the additional wind resistance was a problem.
I think it was the chap who after a number of crashes on landing, squadron leader in the RFC, and I should have brought the my talk with me because I introduced it with the fact that one of the instructions that he had was that on landing the observer was not to stand up as the aircraft was liable to stall. I mean, who was standing up on landing? But yeah, somebody presumably was.
That's in the, I've seen that in some of the notes as well, some of the pilot's notes about that. There's a few key issues with that. But I think that the big thing with that was that the aeroplane, it handled a lot differently to the BE-2. And I've never flown a BE-2, but from what I've read, it handled a lot differently. And also the margin between the approach speed and the stall speed was quite low. It's like something around about, I think it stalls at around about 47 miles an hour, and they used to come in and land at about 55 or less, you know, especially on short strips. They'd want to come in nice and short, or nice and slow, I should say, to reduce their landing roll. So if anyone was standing up and they got the thing out of balance or whatever, it was just a little bit of extra I'm not sure how much of a change it would make, but it was certainly enough that they warranted to put it into the books there to say, listen, don't stand up because we don't want to stall and spin this thing.
Thank you.
For those that are interested, the highest scores were Lieutenants Pithy and Rhodes of 12 Squadron, who were credited with 12 victories.
Terrific. Thank you.
And 3 Squadron Australian Flying Corps was credited with 50 air victories in 12 months of operation.
Terrific.
Des, can I show you my screen with you? I've got a good picture which explains what you could or couldn't do with the rear cockpit of an RE-8.
Well, yes, please do.
So it's a picture of a 3 Squadron aeroplane. I'll share it with you. You've disabled share screening, so you need to enable me to do it.
Oh, okay. What do, I wonder? Okay, hang on. Let's just see. Oh, I see, 1 participant share at a time. Okay, advanced sharing options. All participants. I think I've done all participants now.
Righto, let's have a go, shall we? Yep.
Hang on, multiple participants. Okay.
Right, can you see that now?
Yep.
Can see that.
It says underneath the cockpit there, it says, do not fly with less than 150 pounds in the gunner's compartment. I can't quite make out the rest. Something for climbing, then getting off the ground. I don't know whether anybody else can see it.
I think it says trim when climbing, does it? Does that say trim?
Yes, it must say trim when climbing, I think.
Trim when climbing.
Trim when climbing. And
getting off the ground.
and it's got my turning wheel halfway, so that's probably the trim setting, I would think.
Yeah, that's the trim wheel down the right-hand side.
Yeah, so that kind of answers it. So there was a weight limit, of course, requirements of the counter to the balance. So I thought you might enjoy that.
Thank you. That's brilliant.
No, it's good technologies, and I've got some more pictures if you want. A couple of other ones.
No, that's good. Does anybody else have any questions before we go to Chris's video? Do you have that video still?
Yeah, I do have the video. Hopefully I can share it with you, but I obviously don't want to interrupt anybody's the meeting. So
No, just hang on a minute.
Questions and things?
Des, can I just make one comment about Americans?
Yes.
So did you know that 3 Squadron's commanding officer got a distinguished flying medal, I think it was, from the Americans, because 3 Squadron supported the American Second Army after the Australians had after the infantry had been pulled back from the front. 3 Squadron got allocated to the Americans and apparently gave the Americans a great deal of useful knowledge.
I didn't realise that. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah, so it's I've got a picture of the certificate somewhere, but I can't dig it out right now.
There are a couple divisions that fought up north with the Australians in the British Army.
Yes, yes.
I think 33rd Infantry Division, if I remember right. But
I think the 27th as well, didn't it?
Possibly.
Yeah. So I remember reading that someone commented of all the divisions in the US Army, the 27th was nearly all Irish Americans from New York, and it was probably the last one that should have been attached to the British Army and put under some sort of British control.
Right.
Yeah, that's military efficiency in the US. Yes.
Yes. So when they were attacking the Hindenburg line and Mons and Quentin, I think, but in both of those, the US divisions were involved, as was number 3 Squadron AFC. Right.
Does anyone know if they ever used a twin Lewis scarf mount on an RE-8? I've only seen singles.
Yeah, they did, but I've seen a number of photos, but it wasn't, I don't think it was a regular occurrence, and probably Gareth would know a hell of a lot more than I would about that. But I have seen some photos with twins on the scarf.
Yeah, it was done. I've seen photos too, but I vaguely think it was just too heavy.
It was too heavy, too difficult to rotate the scarf, I think, with both of them.
Too much of a weight to try and swing around.
Yeah.
Also, there's a bit of a problem if you've got twin guns that you can shoot your tailplane much more easily. Single gun's much easier to aim around all that wire and canvas.
I was lucky enough to fly in the back cockpit of a Bristol fighter, which was fitted with replica twin guns. And with the slipstream, it is incredibly difficult to move those things around. I was talking with Russell Smith, the American artist, who's also flown in the FE-2B that's in New Zealand. And he was saying it's actually much easier to move the gun at the front with just the airstream than it is to move the gun in the back of the Bristol fighter under the slipstream of the engine.
Gosh.
Hmm.
Gosh.
By late 1918 in September, the Australian Corps was very much a depleted force. And when it went to the Hindenburg Line fight, the 2 American divisions constituted half of the bayonet strength of the force, even though there were 4 Australian divisions in the line. In the Great War, US Army and National Guard divisions had manpower strengths twice that of comparable British divisions. And without those brave doughboys there in 1918, it's unlikely that we would have carried the day. And that's a fact.
That's fascinating. Perhaps I should just give a plug here that Paul is the president of the Western Front Association Australia, and also you're also involved in the Friends and Families of the First AIF. And if you want to put up your website on the chat at some stage, Paul, that might be useful as well, because it's a wonderful organisation that you have, and you recently had a fascinating webinar on General Monash with your colleagues in the United Kingdom Western Front Association. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else that has any questions that we need to deal with? Oh, sorry, Steve Sotheby has just mentioned that it was the 30th and 27th US Divisions with the British and Australians, and his wife's grandfather was in the 30th. Well, there you are. There's some direct knowledge. Yeah. I haven't seen any other chats there at the moment. So look, we might finish up if that's all right, subject to if we might have your video in a moment, Chris. And look, yeah. I just wanted to thank Gareth for giving his talk today.
Can I get in a question from the United States here?
Oh, sorry, Nick. Yes, please go.
I noticed in some of the pictures that the tips of the RE-8 propellers were darker or appeared a different texture than the rest of the propeller. Were they metal clad, or was that some kind of fabric wrap?
It was a doped canvas wrap.
Okay.
It was to protect the propeller from stone damage and what we now call foreign object damage, I suppose.
Still a big problem today.
Terrific. Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
Any other questions? I don't want to cut people off. Okay. Well, look. Thank you again, Gareth, for a fascinating talk, and for all your marvelous knowledge on this subject. And look, thank you for all the other expert participants: Adrian Helwig, Nick Tulks, James Oglethorpe, and Paul Samatis on the forces on the Western Front. And if I've left anybody else out in thanking people for their contribution, I'm sorry. Oh, Mark Lax, thank you very much. And Chris Gilbert for your story about the tiger moth, which is a bit scary. I don't think I'll fly in one now. And I might move to Chris's share screen. If you could share your screen.
Hopefully I can. I'll have a look. This was, as I said, this was a video that I was going to present when I gave the talk up to you guys last year, but I couldn't get it done. So it's in essence, we were talking about some of the handling capabilities, and also we just wanted to have people have a look at how the thing was started and flew. So I've got a couple of little videos that I've put together just to show you. So I'll see if I can now share my screen, and if I can hopefully that's it. Now, have you got me? Does that look like it's working?
Yeah, that's come
All
up. RE8 prime and
Prime and
start.
start. Okay, so this hopefully, can you hear that as well?
No sound that I can hear at the moment.
Okay. Does anyone know how to fix that? I'll see if I can.
There's some control up. Bernard, is there some control up the top left?
Yeah, I must admit I don't know, Des.
I seem to remember there was some sort of microphone control somewhere.
Well, it's not really, but what's happening now is he's priming the engine. Can you still hear me at the moment?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so he's just priming the engine now, so sucking that through. If you look down where it says Sylvia on the right-hand side of the aircraft there's a little starting magneto. So now I've just called contact, and now he's going to swing the propeller, and at the same time we wind the starting magneto. And this is just a GoPro set from in the back of the scarf ring there. The black on the scarf ring is not normally there in an original aircraft. That's just some pull foamy thing and a bit of tape to make it not so hard to hit if you hit the head. At around about 55 miles an hour, we'll rotate and then climb out at about 60 miles per hour. Now, I was talking before about the RE8 versus the BE2. The RE8 was a lot lighter on the rudder and heavier on the stick than the BE2 was apparently. And it was a really good aeroplane for, as we talked about, for being stable in terms of taking photos or getting information from across the lines. So it trims reasonably well and it sits there nice and stably. Unfortunately, that mark of oil on the camera is a bit frustrating. So this aeroplane had a bit of an issue with turning, and you get a lot of adverse aileron yaw. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to put in left stick, and if you watch the nose of the aeroplane, you see that it rises up to the right of the horizon there, and it's far more dramatic in the aeroplane than it looks in here. If you put the rudder in now, putting the left rudder in, it turns almost wings level. And that's how they used to fly these airplanes initially, was to commence a turn with rudder. And I think that's caused a lot of issues with the BE2 versus the RE8.
Right.
I just filmed this one from the Tiger Moth, similar kind of thing. Not as good at film quality, it's from my phone. So when I roll in, you can see the Tiger Moth on the right the nose hardly moves to the right at all. But watch when I put in rudder on the Tiger Moth, this is hands-free, the nose drops quite dramatically. So two aeroplanes, 30 odd years apart, quite different handling technique.
Mm.
Is this at Point Cook, Chris?
Yeah, this is at Point Cook. So landing at Point Cook towards the north, runway 17 on the Western Grass. And as I said, we come in, you can bring the thing back to around about 50 miles per hour, but I never do. I come in at a minimum of 55 to 60 miles per hour, and always trying to find the wind. So always getting into wind. So, you line up and then you'll correct it once you've found what the wind is doing to land into wind as much as possible. It has a massive tail skid, as you'll see in a second, which pulls the aeroplane up really.
And you're landing on grass here.
Yeah, landing
because
on
of the
grass,
tail
yeah.
skid.
If you walk at the back of the aeroplane there, the tail skid, watch the dirt.
Oh, yes.
Chris, it's
ploughing there.
Yeah.
Is there a fraternity of RE8 pilots elsewhere, and do you maintain contact with service pilots or?
So there's the way that that I was taught to fly this. You can see the Sutton harness there is not particularly. I haven't got it quite tight enough over the shoulders there. The way that I was taught to fly was that we had a guy come over from New Zealand, and this is where this airplane was built, was in New Zealand, and I sat in the back seat of the airplane while he did the flying, and watched what he did, and we yelled at each other. The intercom wasn't particularly good on it. So we yelled at each other about what he was doing. And then after that, I jumped in the front seat to do the flying, and he jumped in the back seat, and I thought he was quite brave. basically just watched what I did then. So that's the video there.
Is there any?
Is Point Cook where the Australian Air Force Museum is located?
I beg your pardon?
Is Point Cook where the Australian Air Force Museum is located?
Yes, it is. Yep, the RAF Museum is at Point Cook. Yes.
Chris, is there any chance that video could get uploaded to YouTube?
Yes and no. I got approval from Defence to use it for the speech at the Society last year, and because we're still at the Society, I'm allowed to use it. I'll have to go back and investigate. The Defence, for some reason, I'm not sure if it's national security secrets, they're worried about. They're worried about something getting out about the RE8, but they hold tightly to their stuff. So I do want to find out, because I've also written an article about it, about flying it, which, because I was flying Defence machine, apparently the article is owned by Defence as well, so I need to get approval to share that as well. So, but I will find out.
Chris, I'm just wondering if I could ask you about the handling of that.
Yeah.
Is it fairly responsive, or they tend to be rather sluggish? Is
it responsive? In one way, yes. In another, more accurate way, not at all.
Right.
It's an airplane it's one of those airplanes that when you walk out, push it out onto the grass, you're really excited about flying it. When you get in and you strap yourself into it, you're very excited and the heart starts pumping, and you're even more excited when you put it back in the hangar undamaged and sit back and have a beer and have a look at it. It's different to any other airplane that I've flown in that the handling of these airplanes, from 1916, 1917, we're only 13 years or so, we're 13 years from the first flight. And in fact, the BE2, I think it was up to C's, maybe Gareth will probably know, the early B2s didn't even have ailerons, they had wing warping. So, this is an early airplane with aileron control. An airplane today, I don't know if you've flown, but if an airplane today, when you fly an airplane, everything is balanced and coordinated or harmonized, so that when you you want to turn left, you stick to the left, squeeze a little bit of left rudder, and the airplane will sit there nicely. This airplane won't do that. So if you turn the airplane in the normal way, i.e. with the controls, you'll get the nose will yaw to the right quite dramatically, as hopefully you saw in that video. So you have to fly the airplane the way they flew it back then, and that was you'd rudder into the turns. And I think you'd rudder into the turns, and then you would stick the control column to a suitable position where the airplane was balanced. And in fact, they've got an inclinometer on it's like a skid ball, but it's a ball inside a tube. I'm familiar with that. And you would then align up the stick with the inclinometer, and that would give you a balanced turn. And I think that was in my opinion only, I think that was a lot of the reasons that these airplanes had a bad name at the start, was because you'd turn you'd turn with rudder. And as I said, it's a lot lighter on rudder than the BE2 was, apparently. So my opinion, or my thoughts, are that a lot of BE2 pilots who were used to heavy rudder turns would slam their foot onto the rudder quite dramatically. The airplane would yaw. They would then try to correct that yaw, the adverse aileron yaw, they'd try to correct that yaw by using the controls, and then they'd end up putting themselves into a spin because they weren't used to the way that the airplane flew, that they had to change it the way that you fly an airplane. So it is incredibly stable once it sits there, but once it gets unbalanced by, say, a gust of air, it takes some time to respond. So you've got to be a bit aware of that.
It was a bit hard to tell. I do have a private license, but I haven't flown for quite some time. But flying the Cessnas and Pipers and things that I flew way back before kids were very, very forgiving, extremely forgiving. And just looking at that video, I was trying to work out whether it was very twitchy or sluggish. I just couldn't really tell.
A bit of that was a little bit of gust. Airplane, once it gets gust, it'll right itself with stability. This thing kind of sits there for a second, and you can get a little bit out of sync if you once the wing drops a little bit, you go put the aileron in, and it doesn't react very quickly. So sometimes you can get yourself a little bit out of sync. So in still air, it's very, very stable. You don't really need to trim it very much. It just sits nicely. throwing it around. And you know, the reports I've read of the World War I pilots, I'm absolutely in awe of their skill and ability to throw these things around, because, you know, to me, it's a bit frightening. Throw it around.
Well, I was interested in I was interested earlier in the comment about the pilot getting out and cutting out a piece of the tail.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, my goodness, you know, how do you recover from a spin without that?
Yeah, well, it was only the fin, so it wasn't the actual rudder itself. It was just the front of the fin there. So, and they put the anti-spin strokes at the bottom, which is that large part at the bottom of the fuselage as well. But the visibility is incredible from that airplane, and I had a photo. I'm not sure if I've got one if I can find it from the rear of the airplane. From the gunner's point of view, it's incredible view that you get from looking back there, because it's got a tapered fuselage. It's an amazing bit of kit.
Can I ask,
fantastic.
can I ask a question about Point Cook itself, Chris? A year or two back, there were news reports that Point Cook was going to be flogged off and turned into a housing estate. But from your video, and I don't know how old your video is, it seems to be still a fully functioning airfield. No sign of a housing estate there.
No,
So
it's saved.
What's the current news on that?
Yeah, it's been saved. It's a fully functioning RAF base in terms of, well, it's got the museum there. There are a couple of other small units. There's always a discussion or talk about repopulating it with units from Laverton, which is just up the road, but it's been saved, so it's not going to be turned into a housing commission.
Oh, good. Oh, that's good news. How long ago was your video shot?
I shot that in, or it was at least a year ago.
It's quite recent. It's quite
recent.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, I wanted to acknowledge the fact that you are a serving officer in the Royal Australian Air Force Reserve in the rank of Flight Lieutenant, and that's your posting. The only military pilot, I would suggest, of a replica RE-8 anywhere in the world.
Yeah, well, I was very, very fortunate. I didn't realise this until we landed, but I was the first Australian military pilot to fly an RE-8 in over 100 years, and the first Royal Australian Air Force pilot to ever fly an RE-8, because of course they weren't Royal Australian Air Force when they were flying the RE-8. So I managed to get 2 1s in one go, which I was quite stoked about. Yeah, very, very honoured to be able to jump in that airplane. It's an amazing machine.
Terrific. Thank you. Chris, that's truly fascinating to certainly see those videos, and also, hear all that detail about flying it. That's just even more expands on your talk that you gave to the society last year.
Yeah, all right. Thanks.
Des, can I add one more fun fact? Beside, you might know this from your dad, but beside actually flying the plane, the pilot was also the one doing the observations, and he was also the one sending the Morse signals.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
That's the truth. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Because the so-called observer, his job was to man the gun and basically to stop them being shot down.
Right.
And yeah, we've got several testimonies about that, and on the website, about the way they operated. And the Morse key was definitely in the front cockpit.
Right. God.
I think that in sort of 1915, when they first started aircraft directing fire from artillery, the observer was going to do the observing and reporting, but they found that it seemed whenever the fired shell exploded, there was a strut in the way, or the aircraft was pointing the wrong. The only person who could keep properly looking at the target was the pilot, because he was controlling where the airplane was. So it was just added to the pilot's duties. I came across a pilot somewhere saying it was rather like driving a high performance car along a winding mountain road and taking detailed notes from the scenery as you went past.
That's wonderful.
We also have some evidence, though, that the observers did fill in those contact patrol maps.
Yes.
Oscar Whitcomb We've got the evidence of him.
Yes.
But I think that's a fairly specialised task, and probably less danger of air-to-air combat when you're down at 0 feet.
And on your at the 3 Squadron Association website, you've got a talk from Neil Smith, I think, about his father flying the RE-8, and it's also got one of those pieces of ply with the map on it that
his map
you're talking about. His
with
map
shrapnel holes and the shrapnel balls he collected in flight.
Yes, yes. The shrapnel hole in it. Yes, yes, that's remarkable. Yes, so people should go and have a look at that. Alex Stewart's just leaving the meeting. Thank you, Alex. Okay, how are we going? Should we finish up now, do you think? Have we come to the end of our questions? Anybody else? Okay, there wasn't anything else that you wanted to add, was there, Chris Tulk?
No, just happy to have been able to finally share that.
No, that's fabulous. That's just absolutely fabulous. All right, well, look, thank you, everybody, for joining this. And it's, touch wood, it's been a great success and so informative from all of you participating. And I'm so glad we could get overseas people, and we will think ahead about timing of our meetings, so we can maybe fit our American guests and our UK guests in a better time frame. I know that the Western Front Association did their webinar at 5:30 in the afternoon, and we might think about that, but we'll consider it. Okay, so if everybody's okay, thank you, Gareth, again, and we might finish up. Is that okay?
Yes, I think
with everybody else.
Yes, thank you all.
All right.
That was very great. Thank you, Des.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Des.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Cheers, all.
Cheerio. Cheerio. Cheerio.